the era in which we grew up reading comic books, mainstream comic books, so your big two, DC and Marvel, for the most part, they had already by the 80s fallen into an event format, which meant that they started to um, gear a lot of their publishing initiatives throughout a given calendar year towards feeding into and building up to whatever the next event was. And in some cases, it was cool. In other cases, like Clone Saga or Zero Hour, it sucked. Um, and so it's kind of been a trap that they fell into and have stayed stuck in for
Mhm.
decades now. In fact, it's worse than ever in many cases, where
Mhm.
it's like every 6 months they have this new big event, and it just doesn't feel that impactful anymore because they just decided, well, everything is building up to that. We are taking our time with trying to world build. We want everybody, because here's the thing, when you do big earth shaking events,
Mhm.
something goes down, right? Something happens that either shifts the status quo, or somebody gets killed, or something happens to somebody that's super tragic, or a combination thereof. And in order for that to actually be impactful, you have to first endear those characters and this world, this setting to your audience. And so that's something that we're laying the groundwork right now still. Like
Mhm.
we're
Mhm.
we're only 2.5 years in, guys. Like we've only it yes, compared to a lot of other indies, um, we've put out a ton of books in a very short period of time. It's going to be a while before we have some big crossover event. Yes, there absolutely will be one and more down the road, but it's going to take a minute. So just be I would encourage people to not worry about crossover events just yet. And I know that's difficult, especially those of us, like I said, that have been comic book fans for years. So we're already kind of like ingratiated and conditioned to this kind of event format that a lot of publishers do. But
Mhm.
we're trying to be very careful. Something that Eric and I had a conversation about not too long ago was matters of scale and pacing. So when you
Mhm.
start talking about power scaling, as soon as you introduce a character, whether it's a villain or a hero, that does something ridiculous, suddenly you have to start continually upping the ante. You have to start power scaling upwards and increasing your threat level. And then you end up with Dragon Ball Z versus Dragon Ball, right? To where you're, even though the story could still be entertaining, it's less about the story and more about just the action, who's the next biggest threat. And that's
Mhm.
something we're very diligent right now about straying far away from. So, if we're introducing a new character, be it a hero or villain, there are, either going to be consequences to their powers or limitations, things like that. And that way we make sure that we don't rush ourselves into cranking up the threat level too quickly, rushing ourselves into big earth threatening events and things like that, because it's important in order for us to have staying power. And that's the important thing. We're not trying to rush into a crisis on infinite earths, which would be impossible for us because we have no multiverse in the way that you would typically look at from your Marvel and DC and things like that. Obviously, if you read ISOM 2, Bloodruth talks about there being other realms or other planes of existence, but that is not in the traditional sense of what DC and Marvel utilize as a multiverse. And so we don't want to rush into any of that. So just like be patient, uh, latch on to the stories and the characters that you are enjoying. Look forward to the next iterations and next publishing drops of those, and just enjoy the ride with us. We will get to an event at some point down the road. The first, I guess, event, though it doesn't land like you would say a Crisis on Infinite Earths, Great War of Separation. You can look at that, even though it's okay. So it's pitched as a limited series, and that is accurate. However, you could also look at it through the lens of it being the event that really sets up the Rippaverse.